Evelyn had always been drawn to the mysteries of nature, and the rumors surrounding the Forest of Lost Time captivated her curiosity. The locals whispered of a place where time flowed differently and the fog had the power to erase memories. Many had entered the forest to explore its unique flora, but few returned, and those who did were never quite the same. Determined to uncover the truth for her research, Evelyn gathered her gear and set off for the forest. After days of travel through remote terrain, she finally stood before the forest's edge. Ancient trees loomed above her, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sky. A heavy mist drifted lazily through the undergrowth, carrying an unnatural stillness that made her uneasy. The air around the forest felt heavy, as if it were holding its breath. Evelyn took a deep breath, adjusted her backpack, and stepped into the shadows of the forest. The temperature dropped immediately, and a chill ran down her spine. Her compass spun erratically, refusing to point north. Ignoring the oddities, she marked the trail behind her with a piece of chalk and moved forward, her eyes scanning the area for signs of the flora she had come to study. As she ventured deeper, the forest seemed to change around her. The path twisted and turned, the trees grew closer together, and the mist thickened, swirling around her feet. She glanced back to ensure her chalk marks were still visible, but the trail she had just walked seemed to stretch into a dark, endless corridor. A whispering breeze rustled the leaves, sending a shiver through her. Something was off about this place, something that defied nature itself. Hours passed, or so it seemed. Evelyn checked her watch, but the hands had stopped moving. Confused, she tapped the glass face, but it remained motionless. Time felt strange here, slipping away without her noticing. As she pushed forward, a dense fog began to roll in, creeping silently between the trees. It was thick, almost tangible, and it carried with it a faint scent of earth and decay. She hesitated, watching the fog move with an unnatural fluidity. It wasn't like any fog she had seen before. It seemed to have a life of its own, swirling and shifting as if responding to her presence. As the fog enveloped her, she felt a strange sensation, like a light, static hum inside her head. The air around her grew colder, and the forest fell silent, the only sound the rustling of leaves underfoot. The whispers began, soft and indistinct, coming from all directions. She turned in a circle, straining to listen, but the voices were elusive, slipping through her grasp like water through fingers. Suddenly, images flashed in her mind. Memories of her childhood, her family, moments she had long forgotten. They came and went in an instant, leaving her dazed and disoriented. "Focus," she muttered to herself, shaking her head to clear the fog that clouded her thoughts. She had to keep moving. The forest was playing tricks on her, trying to confuse her. She glanced at her compass again, hoping to find some sense of direction, but the needle spun wildly, refusing to settle. The forest was alive, she realized, bending time and space around her, and it was testing her. Evelyn pressed on, her steps growing more hesitant as the forest paths twisted and changed. No matter how carefully she marked her trail, the paths behind her seemed to alter when she glanced away, the trees shifting and rearranging themselves. It was as if the forest were a living labyrinth, constantly changing to keep her lost within its depths. The fog thickened, reducing her visibility to mere feet. Every step felt uncertain, the ground beneath her soft and uneven. She reached out to touch the trees, hoping to use them as guides, but their bark felt wrong, smooth and cold, like polished stone. It sent a jolt of unease through her, and she pulled her hand back, heart racing. She came upon a clearing, a circular patch of ground where the trees formed a perfect ring around an ancient stone monolith covered in moss. The sight of the monolith gave her pause. Its surface was etched with symbols she couldn't decipher, and the air around it buzzed with energy. It felt like an anchor point in the forest, a place of power that the mist seemed to avoid. As she approached the monolith, the whispers intensified, growing louder until they were almost deafening. She clasped her hands over her ears, trying to block them out, but they persisted, swirling around her. The voices spoke in fragmented sentences, recounting events and moments she didn't recognize. Were they her memories? or the memories of others who had wandered into the forest before her. The whispers suddenly ceased, leaving an eerie silence that pressed in from all sides. Evelyn took a shaky breath, glancing around the clearing. The trees loomed ominously, their twisted branches resembling clawed hands reaching for her. A rustling sound came from the undergrowth, and she turned, shining her flashlight into the darkness. A shape moved between the trees, a shadow, fleeting and indistinct. She squinted, trying to make out its form, but it darted away, disappearing into the mist. Heart pounding, she took a step back, scanning the area for any sign of danger. The forest had grown colder, the air filled with an electric tension that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. The ground beneath her feet began to shift, the soil churning as roots emerged, snaking toward her like fingers reaching out to grab her ankles. Panic surged within her, and she stumbled back, nearly falling as the roots coiled around her boots. She kicked out, struggling to free herself, but the roots tightened, pulling her down. "Stay calm," she told herself, grasping at the monolith for support. It was cold and rough against her palms, a stark contrast to the smooth, unnatural texture of the roots. As she clung to the stone, the roots hesitated, retreating slowly back into the earth. The mist around her seemed to waver, and the shadows that lurked in the trees withdrew, as if repelled by the monolith's presence. Gasping for breath, Evelyn released the monolith and stepped back, her legs trembling. The forest had tested her, trying to trap her in its grasp. But the monolith had provided some form of protection, a ward against the forest's creeping malevolence. She realized then that she was not merely exploring the forest, she was fighting it. Evelyn continued through the forest, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. The fog thickened once more, and the whispers returned, tugging at the edges of her consciousness. They grew louder with every step, echoing through the trees, distorting her sense of time. Hours, days. She couldn't tell how long she had been wandering. Her memories started to blur. As she pushed forward, she felt her mind slipping. The forest was stealing fragments of her past, twisting her thoughts. She paused, struggling to recall why she had entered the forest in the first place. Was she here to study plants? Or was there another reason? She took out her journal, flipping through the pages to anchor herself. The scribbles of her research were still there, along with notes on the forest's peculiar properties. But some pages were blank, the ink smeared and faded, as if parts of her own story had been erased. Panic gripped her. She clutched the journal to her chest, forcing herself to remember. "This is a trick," she whispered, her voice trembling. The forest was trying to make her lose herself, to trap her in its endless maze of shifting paths and stolen memories. She needed to stay focused, to find a way out before it erased everything she was. She pressed on, using the journal as a guide. With each turn, the trees seemed to move, rearranging themselves into new configurations, blocking her path. She marked every junction with a scrap of cloth torn from her shirt, desperate to create a trail she could follow back. But each time she looked back, the markers had vanished, swallowed by the mist. The deeper Evelyn ventured, the more the forest pressed in around her. The fog turned thicker, now tinged with a faint glow, and the whispers grew clearer. They no longer just murmured. They spoke in distinct voices, voices of people, some pleading, others laughing, a few crying out in fear. It was a cacophony of sounds, chaotic and haunting. She stopped in her tracks, straining to listen. One voice stood out from the rest, clear and familiar. "Evelyn, you need to leave." Her heart skipped a beat. It was the voice of her late grandmother, the one who had inspired her love for nature. "This place, it's not what you think." She turned in a circle, shining her flashlight through the mist. "Grandma," she called, her voice echoing back to her. There was no answer, only silence and the faint rustling of leaves. It couldn't be her grandmother, she reasoned. It was the forest, using her memories against her. As she continued, the voices multiplied, speaking fragments of sentences, each one tied to a memory. "You can't escape. We belong here. We are forgotten." The words clawed at her mind, dragging up emotions and fears she had buried long ago. It was as if the forest were reaching into her very soul, tearing at the fabric of her identity. Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes. She dropped to her knees, clutching her head. She needed to block out the voices, to focus on something real, something that could anchor her. She dug through her backpack, pulling out a small pendant her grandmother had given her, a symbol of their shared love for nature. Holding it tightly, she whispered, "I am not lost. I will find my way out." The whispers faded slightly, retreating into the background. The forest seemed to ease its grip, allowing her a moment of clarity. With renewed determination, she stood up and started walking again. She wouldn't let the forest consume her memories. Evelyn pushed forward, her legs heavy, her mind fogged with exhaustion. Eventually, she came across a clearing unlike any other she had seen. It was circular, bordered by ancient, towering trees that seemed to bend inward, forming a natural dome. In the center stood a large, gnarled tree with roots that sprawled across the ground, glowing faintly with a blue light. She approached the tree cautiously, feeling its power radiate through the air. The whispers had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that made her skin prickle. The roots seemed to pulse rhythmically, as if the tree itself were alive, breathing. Evelyn knelt beside the roots, examining them closely. They were covered in strange symbols, similar to those she had seen on the monolith earlier. This tree was different. It was ancient, and somehow, she knew it was the heart of the forest's power. If the forest stole memories, then this tree was its guardian. She placed her hands on the roots, feeling a surge of energy pass through her. Images flooded her mind. Visions of people wandering through the forest, their memories draining into the roots like water into a thirsty soil. Each memory was absorbed, becoming part of the forest, feeding it. She gasped, pulling her hands away. The forest wasn't just alive. It was feeding on the lost and forgotten. Standing up, Evelyn felt a mix of fear and resolve. The tree was the source of the forest's power. If she could disrupt it, she might be able to break free. But how? It wasn't just a tree. It was ancient, rooted in magic and mystery far beyond her understanding. She circled the tree, searching for anything that could help. There, half buried among the roots, was a stone covered in moss. It was carved with symbols like those on the monolith, but these seemed to glow with a different light, a purer, less malevolent energy. She reached out, brushing the moss away to reveal the full pattern. The moment her fingers touched the stone, the forest reacted. The ground trembled, and the tree's roots shuddered, retracting slightly. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic than ever. "Stop! You don't understand!" they screamed, filling the air with an intensity that made her head throb. Evelyn ignored them, focusing on the stone. It was warm to the touch, vibrating with energy. She could feel the forest's anger, its desperate attempt to protect itself. "I'm not yours to keep," she muttered, tracing the symbols with her fingers. The symbols glowed brighter, and a wave of energy surged through her. The tree let out a deep, groaning sound, its branches rattling as if in agony. The ground shook violently, and the fog thickened, swirling around her in a frenzy. Evelyn gritted her teeth, refusing to let go of the stone. She was not going to be another lost soul in this forest. The tree's roots recoiled, pulling back into the earth. The fog began to dissipate, revealing a faint path leading out of the clearing. The whispers turned into wails, a cacophony of voices protesting her escape. But Evelyn held her ground, the stone in her hand glowing brightly, cutting through the forest's darkness. She stepped forward, following the path as it twisted through the trees. With each step, the forest seemed to grow weaker, its grip loosening. The fog cleared, the trees parted, and the path widened, revealing the forest's edge. Her heart pounded as she saw sunlight filtering through the leaves ahead. She was close. The voices faded into whispers, then silence. The forest let out one last sigh, a breath of resignation, as she crossed the boundary into the open air. The weight that had pressed on her mind lifted, leaving her exhausted but free. Evelyn collapsed to the ground outside the forest, gasping for breath. She clutched the pendant around her neck, feeling its warmth. She had escaped, but she knew she was not the same. The forest had taken something from her, a part of her memories, fragments of her past. But she had also taken something from the forest, the knowledge of its power, its hunger for the lost. She stood up slowly, turning to look back at the forest. It loomed silently, its edges shrouded in mist, hiding its secrets once more. She had survived, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching, waiting for the next soul to wander in. If this journey through the forest of lost time gripped you, make sure to subscribe for more tales of mystery and horror. Share your thoughts. What would you do if you found yourself in a forest that steals your memories? Give this video a thumbs up and remember, some places are better left unexplored.